In the time before empires had names, in the shadow of the great city of Aksum, there lived a boy who had nothing. No family, no home, no future. His name was Tadesse, and he was invisible to the world. Tadesse knew hunger like a brother. Every day was a battle just to survive. While wealthy merchants feasted in stone houses, he searched garbage heaps for moldy bread. While noble children played with wooden toys, he dodged stones thrown by guards who saw him as little more than a pest. Sometimes, when night fell and the streets grew quiet, Thaddeus passed a blind old woman sitting by the roadside. She often whispered to herself, murmuring to shadows as if they could hear her. Thaddeus never stopped to listen. Hunger always called louder, but despite having nothing, Thaddeus's heart had not hardened completely. One evening, he found half a loaf of bread behind the baker's shop, enough to fill his empty stomach for the first time in days. As he turned to leave, he noticed a small girl, no more than 7 years old, shivering in a doorway. Her eyes were hollow with hunger. Her lips were cracked from fever. Tadesse hesitated. His stomach screamed at him to keep the bread, but something deeper spoke louder. He broke the loaf in half and placed it in the sick child's trembling hands. She looked up at him with grateful tears, too weak to speak. Eat, he whispered. Tomorrow will be better. He didn't believe his own words, but he hoped she would. Thaddeus watched the fortunate ones, the blacksmith with his powerful arms, the baker with his skilled hands, the scholar with his ocean of knowledge. And he wondered, what if he could be them, just for a moment? That night, as the sun disappeared and shadows grew long, something impossible happened. Strength surged through his body. The blacksmith's memories flooded into him. The weight of the hammer, the heat of the forge, the rhythm of metal bending to his will. For the first time in his life, Tadesse felt powerful. Then the feeling vanished. The shadow slipped away as quickly as it came. But Tadesse understood. When the sun set and shadows merged, he could borrow what belonged to others. Night after night, he tested the gift in secret. A dancer's shadow taught his body grace. A scholar's shadow filled his mind with words he had never learned. A thief's shadow taught him how to disappear into darkness. Each time, the power thrilled him. Each time, it left him emptier. One night, his carelessness nearly killed him. In an abandoned courtyard, he borrowed the shadow of a sleeping guard, his body moving with trained precision. Suddenly, torchlight flooded the stones. Who's there? Tadesse released the shadow too late. His borrowed skill vanished. He stumbled, clumsy and weak, escaping only as a spear struck stone inches from his body. When he finally collapsed in a dark alley, gasping for breath, he looked at his hands. They were faint, transparent. At dawn, as Tadesse staggered through the streets, a familiar voice spoke. Boy, you smell of shadows that don't belong to you. It was the blind woman, the one who spoke to shadows, the one he had always ignored. Her clouded eyes turned toward him as if she could see everything. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. Every shadow you borrow takes a piece of you, she said. Use too many, and you will fade completely. No body, no voice, no life, just an echo. Tadesse felt the truth of her words in his thinning bones. He could stop, return to being hungry, invisible, forgotten, or he could keep surviving. 3 days passed. Tadesse tried to ignore what he had seen, tried to forget the warning, but fate had other plans. Smoke soon rose from the wealthy quarter. The merchant Dawit, the richest man in Aksum, was cruelty wrapped in silk and gold. Tadesse had seen him throw stones at street children, laugh at beggars, cut off a boy's hand for stealing an apple. Borrowing Dawit's shadow showed him everything poisoned wells, foreign raiders, a city sold for gold. In 3 days, during the festival of harvest, Dawit would poison Aksum's water. Thousands would die, and in the chaos, foreign armies would claim the city. Who would believe a beggar boy? I am nothing, Tadesse whispered to himself. Then his eyes hardened. But even nothing can cast a shadow. The night of the festival arrived. Torches burned, music filled the streets. Children laughed, families danced. Tadesse thought of the sick girl he had helped. He thought of everyone who would die if he did nothing. He borrowed what he needed: a guard's strength, an acrobat's speed, a storyteller's voice, a healer's resolve. With each shadow, he faded. By the time he reached Dawit at the central well, he was barely there. A whisper, a shadow of a shadow. What are you? Dawit screamed. I'm what you made me, Tadesse replied. Every life you crushed, every voice you silenced. He moved like smoke. Spears passed through him. Swords cut only air. He seized the poison and ran to the center of the festival. People of Aksum, he cried, this man planned to poison us all. The crowd turned. Dawit fell. The city was saved. But victory came with a price. Tadesse collapsed in the same alley where his story began, fading, barely visible. The blind woman knelt beside him. Foolish boy, she said softly, you saved them all and lost yourself. I was already nothing, Tadesse replied. At least now, I mattered. She placed her hand on his chest and closed her blind eyes. You borrowed shadows, boy, but shadows are just borrowed light, she said, and light can be given back, but never without a scar. Golden light began to glow from her palm. Throughout the city, the people Tadesse helped, even those who never knew he saved them, felt a warmth in their chests. Strongest of all was the love of a small girl who once sat shivering in a doorway. The shadows Tadesse had borrowed began to return, but they didn't come back empty. They carried gratitude, they carried love, they carried memory. Streams of golden light flowed back to Tadesse. His body solidified. Color returned to his skin. He gasped, breathing deeply. The people gave him what he had never had. They gave him a place in their hearts. They gave him existence. But when he stood, his shadow was thinner than before, a reminder of what he had given. Days later, Tadesse stood in the city market, no longer a beggar. People nodded to him with respect. A merchant offered him food freely. Children waved. Among them was the little girl he had helped. She was healthy now, her cheeks full of color. She ran to him and hugged his leg. You came back, she said. Tadesse smiled. I promised you tomorrow would be better. Tadesse never borrowed another shadow. He didn't need to. He taught forgotten children. He protected them. He gave them what he never had: hope. One night, a young boy whispered, Tadesse, sometimes when I touch shadows, I feel things, like they're trying to tell me something. Tadesse smiled gently. Then your story, he said, is just beginning. They say in the ancient land of Aksum, there was once a boy who could borrow shadows, but the truth is deeper. He didn't borrow them, he carried them. He carried the strength of the forgotten, the courage of the unseen, the hope of the powerless. And when you have nothing left to lose, you become capable of everything. This is the story of the boy who borrowed shadows. May you remember, even the smallest light can cast the longest shadow, and perhaps somewhere in the darkness, a shadow is waiting. Pause. If Tadesse's story reminded you that even when you have nothing, you can still matter, then I invite you to do two things. First, subscribe to this channel. I'm building a home for African folktales, stories that don't just entertain, but transform. Second, share this story with one person, someone who needs to remember that they are not invisible. Leave a comment and tell me which moment stayed with you. And if you want to hear what happens next to the boy who may become the next shadow keeper, let me know. Thank you for listening. And remember, even the smallest light can cast the longest shadow. See you in the next tale.